So I've started the recording. Good that you remind me. And I'm not sure if we will have any more joining. It's the first meeting after this summer, so there might be some lag in picking up the new time. And Lars, are you trying to record with your thingy? You had given that up?
No, well, yes, and then I didn't remember it until I connected that. But it has been so many troubles with it, I don't trust it anymore. I can't believe this is an issue, but it is.
Yes, there's always something. Yeah. So let's get started with today's session. First of all, welcome. And it has been a fairly long time since we met in this forum, and we have been working with quite a few things during the summer, and my primary concern has been to investigate what we can do with the client. So it's first very important to say that there is absolutely nothing wrong with the AngularJS client. We'll support that for quite some time yet, and it's actually, when you compare it to the new Blazor things, it's impressively fast, the AngularJS, especially when it comes to switching pages and things like that. It's quite easy to make complex pages with MDriven. Just add more stuff, and that means more components on the page, and there's always a limit to how much these UI frameworks actually were designed for and how much they can cope. But as we have had on the large project at Perigo, VPF application with the screens that were suited for office work, and more or less we just transposed that into a web application. All of a sudden the web page has maybe 100 different fields to fill in, and on top of that some grids that should be editable, and then the grid might have 10 columns, and then there's 10 more fields for each row, and then of course it might be 10 rows, so it blows up quite quickly, and I think there will always be a time where this will be an issue, so you can't expect to have thousands of controls on a page and expect it to not suffer from it. But nevertheless, it seems to go pretty well. I don't know where the limit is, but I'm sure there is one. And the main example that I've used for testing or verification is the one that we now have moved in to the GitHub repository. So Lars, that's important for you to know as well, that I've took a downloaded copy from our own style check demo, checked it in GitHub. So it's available here, and it's easy to get access to that. And it's not an impressive model in any way, but it has a lot of UI with different aspects, so it's a good thing to use for testing. So once you have that in a model, and you have updated your turnkey to the very latest, and you can restart that server, so it surely goes towards this model. And then you will have an application running at this address. So let's take one browser and pull it out. And first, if I just go to the index page, I can see that this says app. And if I try any of the pages within the menus, I can see that, yeah, now it turns to MD, and that is for Blazor, but it could just as well be app. And then the same page would be rendered with AngularJS. So what controls that it said MD from the start? That's actually something that I've added. It's the sys MDriven misc setting singleton, and there's a setting here called global Blazor client. So if this is true, the default will be the Blazor client. So if you were to turn that off, which I can do by going to the debugger and searching for the misc singleton, and I'm going to turn off global Blazor singleton. And when I've done that, I need to restart the application to make sure that, because that setting is read upon start, I'm going to restart it here. And if I now go to index, I'm at index, and if I choose one of the menus, I'm in the Angular client. So of course, this hashtag here is a signal to the Angular framework that this is something, the things after the hashtag is something that is handled by the client side. And that's actually nicer done in Blazor, because you don't have that hashtag. It has fixed the signaling to the browser some other way, unclear how. But so whenever I move around the application now and choose any type of navigation, it will stay in the Angular. But, and this might be something that we should turn off. The Blazor client is still available. You just need to change the app part to MD. And then the Blazor client is loaded instead. So even though the setting says that that it isn't always on and preferred, it's still available. And I think this is good, because that means that we can potentially, at the client side, we might have some UIs that are suitable, that we can turn into Blazor immediately, and some that we might not be ready to turn into Blazor. And why might that be? Well, components. Because whenever we write custom components, they are sort of destined to the framework which they live in. So there will be a difference between AngularJS components and Blazor components. And that's a big plus, actually, because AngularJS components are harder to debug. So the great promise with Blazor is that we're going to lift the level of abstraction when it comes to coding the front end, so it will be much less error prone.
A couple of questions there, Hans.
Mm.
One is, the first is, can one set this on a view model level? Because I can imagine that you wouldn't want to accidentally show the wrong one, because then you'll get customer feedback, you know, from users as like, this is not working because the component isn't showing that you expected it to do.
Yeah, so you can't do that now, but that would be a good extension and a good idea to actually have it as we have MVC. We have a tag value to force it to MVC. We should have one for this this client as well, so that one can choose on a per page level when needed. That would be probably a good way to ease in the new client.
Because I'm thinking of this for some clients that I'm running with, and it would be really, really nice to be able to turn on Blazor for most pages. So I think you're absolutely right. But then we have some compatibility things that we need to work on. And then this would be that you can turn on Blazor as a default, but then turn on Angular for some page. And then that it would just switch. When you go to this page, it's just Angular. And when you go to the other one, it's Blazor.
Yeah.
It would be really nice.
So if we were to look at the page structure, so we can add some data to this table, and if we were to do a complete refresh here, we can see that it downloaded the .NET framework, 8.78 megabytes. So hopefully that will be cached and not downloaded all that often. But of course, and if we were to, I guess we can do it like this. We can see how much data we have loaded. So we still load quite a lot of CSS, etc. that we share. Not seeing the main, the one that's said here. So that might be .NET JS network. Yeah, that might have been cached already. So, but if we were to look at the exact same thing in Angular, it's quite a lot of JavaScript as well that comes.
Yeah, I'm actually amazed how quick JavaScript is for being interpreted. So I have just one might be petty question about this, Hans, more that because I had two. That is like, everyone loved it when we had like the app. So what is MD, and could that be like something that people like?
Yeah, so I don't know what people like really, so I'm not the human resources guy, so I don't know what it should be. So it was just a word that was not conflicting with anything else that we had, and so it was short for MDriven, and that what we started with. But we can change that definitely.
I think you had created the application internally as like BLAP or something.
Yeah,
which is a bit weird maybe. So, but you can cut it to BAPP. That at least gives people a thing that it is an app, or it's like app and then add something app. I don't know if we can have but something that, because people were really, we had Turnkey there back in the day, and that really annoyed a lot of people. Yeah. So they seem to be wanting to understand it.
Yeah. So what the Blazor client does is analyzing anything that goes from the hosting, or rather from the application root, and then starts with this word. So this must be present in everything. And of course, yeah. And if you were to navigate out from that, it would sort of break form and lose the client and do something else. But as the client is there, it is supposed to be able to quite quickly switch between pages. So we can see what happens when we switch between pages. It's not much, which is good. So it's just asking the server for some data refresh, and it's really empty on the network. And if we were to inspect the actual generated HTML, we can see that it's very clean. It's only the exact things that are on screen that we see. And this is not really the case for the Angular client. So if we were to compare this with Angular, there's a lot more text in the Angular client, and that is because Angular doesn't really have a shadow DOM to keep everything in. In Angular, we send the template with a lot of Angular controller commands, which are replaced and expanded. So there's there will be places for things that might show up on the screen eventually. They will be here all the time, but in Blazor, that's not the case. Things that might show up on the screen eventually will not necessarily be here from the start. And I have found it is possible to actually step the C# code from within the debugger, but it's still quite hard to debug inside Chrome or Edge to get the client. But one great thing is that the Blazor framework also is compilable as in the .NET runtime that isn't the WASM runtime, the WASM runtime. And that enables us to step it quite easily and just like any other program within Visual Studio. That, however, requires us to host the application in a different way. And this is the way that Microsoft suggests that you should build desktop applications in the future with the framework MAUI to get things running on a phone or something like that as an application. And we can just see how that would look. Let's see if I can find my
Are you saying that the MAUI is using a web browser to render, or is it a different renderer but the same like definition technique of the user interface?
So MAUI was actually a different UI rendering technique from the start, and it still is, I should say. But it seems, at least to me, that there are a lot of questions on how can I use MAUI and then lift in a web view to do all the rendering in the web view. So one of the common use cases seems to be, I want to be on an Android phone or an iPhone, but I want to use C# MAUI framework, but I want to render the app UI as HTML. And that is exactly what this simple client does for us. So in this client, I have actually pulled in one MAUI capable web view here and one standard web view here. And on this side, I access the Blazor client, and on this side, I access the Angular client. And that makes it possible for me to run through some of these tests in Blazor. Yeah, let's see why that. So I've been doing a lot of work with trying to reduce the number of times each component is rendered, and I'm sure I have introduced a few bugs while doing that. So this is the Blazor component, and I want to do the same on the Angular one. So I've implemented these buttons that whenever I have something in Angular and then press this button, it switches to the same navigation, but in Angular. So I'm going to hide this side menu as well. So that makes it easy for me to see where we have differences in rendering. I'm not sure why we would have this exact difference with some more space up here, but that's part of the work to figure out exactly how the rendering is happening. So then I can easily do that by just inspecting, and usually best to try press it, inspect 2 times to see why do we have excessive space here above this one versus this one. So that's kind of what the work is at this point, to figure out all the quirks and differences. But it's interesting to note, once I did this work, it dawned on me how many details there are in the client. Everything from simple text field types to alerts that should show up when you try to navigate the way without having saved. So now we haven't saved. Yeah, now we're in Angular. We should watch this in Blazor so I don't fool you. Text field types. So if I try to navigate away from this, I should get some information that I need to save first. So these kind of pop-ups that yeah, and the styles here are not correct, but at least they are there. So I've focused on getting them to show. And there's a lot of different test cases for each of these, and it's not really super well laid out, I should say. There's we can definitely improve on this. I think I got a breakpoint in the. So here we can see how the client actually looks like in C#. So this is one of the things that I've worked on recently to create a checksum to be able to reduce the number of times a UI control is rendered. So I'm producing a checksum for each data that we have to see if we really need to re-render a component, and that helps in getting things faster. But in this case, it fails here because we got a null exception. It's a bad null check. I'm going to see what happens if I just overrun it. But this is the exact same code that then later on runs in the browser. But it seems to be a bit different because when I run it as this MAUI thing or VPF thing, it has access to threads and it does things in a slightly different order, and you can run into race conditions that you don't see on the browser and vice versa, because the browser is actually single threaded and it only uses the asynchronous strategy to so what single threaded means and what the asynchronous thing, why it makes things better, is that once the browser waits for network, it can continue with UI. So it's really multi-threaded in the way that it doesn't need to wait for the HTTP client. But there's only one thread for logic and rendering, really. So let's see what happens. Yeah, so this is how it looks when it fails hard. So I can reload it. And I'm going to turn on the test case for validation, for example. Oh, that might not be that. Okay, that one. Okay, so I have some work to do with the checksum thing, but this is also a integrated part of what the client can do to turn on validations on most everything's. And if things should show or not, of course. And there's a test for numeric fields, and here we can see that if we compare this with the Angular one, that we need to save. We can go to the Angular one. We can see that this actually doesn't write just the numbers as it should. So this is the Angular client, but on Blazor, we see that these are number fields and then correctly write just numbers in the edit fields. Because
how does that work, Hans? When you edit, if you go into the control, does it move to the left then to make it easier, or is it? I don't know what's easiest really about it.
No, it's still here. So when it is a number, these up and down buttons, if it's not a floating point number, these up and down buttons are introduced.
I just meant when you're typing, does it like grow to the left, or does it? But it seems like it's going to grow to the.
Yeah.
Because I don't know when that is, but it's quite common that when you go into the controller, everything jumps to the left, and then you edit there, and when you leave it, aligns to the right.
In Angular, we have has been a limitation to have string format on edit controls. You can have it when you render, but it breaks the binding, two-way binding. So
does this mean also that we'll have access to the full C# format string set, or are we still restricted there?
yeah, so the string format for Blazor will be the normal C# string format.
I mean, I think that's very good because it's much more expressive
Yeah.
than the one that was in AngularJS.
Yes.
You couldn't do at all as much there.
No. So that should be available once we're done, and it partly is, but let's see if we can see on the date picker fields. Yeah, in Angular, we also had an issue with the datetime pickers that they wouldn't render full width in the so that has also been addressed with the Blazor client. So there's these minor changes, but there's something with the space that has changed since I last checked this, so it's good to check again. And
one thing that I've been wondering since you demoed this internally, Hans, is the menus, the top menus, are they still rendered the same way as before, or are the whole page now Blazor, like even up in the menu system?
Yeah, so this is also Blazor, and one place where that shows is, for example, here. So if you want to test the access groups, so this action here is not enabled because the access group says no. So if you were to press that, you see that this updates.
Very good, because it has been a bit clunky, the whole setup, because we had to do a lot of like trickery to get that to work well in the AngularJS client for historical reasons. Not that it's not possible, but yeah.
So this, of course, the flexibility that this offers and the ease of development brings a lot of ideas to attention, but we need to pace ourselves because we don't want to run with this to move too far away from what the Angular client is today. But for example, it would be beneficial if this basically was its own view model, so that you could change, you could have information like you have notes and things like that up in the menu bar, if that's what you like, or totally re-render this with a bunch of icons or something like that. This part, however, the register and login, that hands over to the normal account MVC controller at the server. And it really needs to do that because these login operations shouldn't be managed by the client, because that's a security risk. Even if we when we need to communicate with an OpenID authenticator, then we don't want to communicate via the client. We want to communicate via the server to avoid that our secret and such is exposed. So these are actually lifted in as rendered things, and when you click them, that would mean that you would break form and jump out of the application. And that's an issue with this MAUI web view, because when you break out of the application, that's not allowed to in this kind of web view. So you will get an error when you go here. First you need to save, and then, well, it would have given you an error if I didn't catch it and say that you tried to go here, and that wasn't possible because there was no local page to log in. Yeah. So and the data table is of course always a hassle because it's the most complex control. What I haven't implemented is the resize on column head, but basically this is a component that Microsoft is, or the extra, it's an extra thing that I've decided to use, and it supports dynamic loading and sorting of columns and things like that. But all the controls within here are actually the same control that we use when we render them up front. And that reduces the explosion of things to maintain that we had before. So if we were to look at one of these controls, like for example the checkbox, how it's implemented, one could, it's called a bold field. It's implemented like this. It inherits our comp base, which is basically make sure that we have a data holder, which basically is access to visibility, enable the actual value, etc. And so this is the control. It starts with a div, and then it gets some classes. But of course, if we are in a grid, we don't want the same classes as if we are rendered standalone. So we have implemented this generic method, get style, and this plus maybe in grid. So if we can see how this is implemented is that we get the base style. So if we are rendered as a grid cell, then we append the in grid modifier on the CSS style, which jacks into our styling system, so it's rendered with as it should be when it's in a grid. Then of course we might have unique styles that we have added ourselves. They will also be added, and there might be a current error, and then we need to append a style for that. So it's all rather neat that we can centralize all of this logic to a few places and have them the same for all controls, basically. And then if we're not a grid cell, then we want to draw the label. And the label is actually not super simple because you can have an icon in front of the label, etc. So that in turn has been made into a control to centralize and to reuse the label rendering for all of the controls. So a label is actually this, that, and the icon is internal control that only renders if there is an icon on that position. And then we have the style, and then we have the actual label. And since the label logic is It could either be the static label from the view model that we have designed, or the view model could have added the extra control, the sub control with underscore label. So data for the label should be grabbed from somewhere else. So all of these things are sort of solved by the by our component structure. So it's quite easy to support all the things that the view model knows how to do with a limited set of components that are very generic and quite rather few ifs and buts when we come to rendering it.
I'll just ask you, I know we've talked about it, but I don't know if you have gotten to it yet, that we could also use the same rendering logic for MVC pages. That is, for everyone else, that's pages that actually don't have like JavaScript, or in this case, WebAssembly code running. So like a static page. Because I'm thinking here, can Google, but it can, right? Can Google index a Blazor page, a client Blazor page, or does it need to be server-side rendered for Google to actually read it?
Good question. I think what Google might do with their robot is to avoid loading any JavaScript, and then it would pretty much come up blank. But what .NET 8 promises and makes available, even if it's not something that I've put effort into, but I will going forward, is to pre-render the page on the server. So how could we possibly pre-render? Because our client that actually fetches the data, and this wasn't as clear in Angular as it is now. The client that actually communicates with the server and makes sure that we have this data tree and that represent the data within the view model is one thing. And that communicates via a shared interface. So the view client has an interface section that it needs to implement. And this makes it possible for us to use the rendering mechanism server side. We just need to implement a different way to get to all of these functions server side. And that's quite easy for us because that's the VM class structure that we have server side, and which we already use to represent data on the server. So I don't foresee any big issues with that, but that would enable us to completely run an MVC or static page with the exact same rendering and exact same styling, etc., without needing to maintain a double code base.
It's really cool. That would also, I guess, mean that components that our clients or customers put into their pages would have the same ability.
Yes, so that's the A. So the next thing that I've only experimented with is to how do we get external components into the application without the need to recompile everything. And it's doable, but I've had a few ideas and tested those, and that they work, but we still need to figure out the best way to do it.
Yeah, so I'm talking not really to ask you, Hans, but I'm just pointing out that it would be, and it has been like a little bit of a dream for quite some time, to be able to have an application that is partly fully rendered server side, and then it just would switch over to be client side rendered. So you can have pages that are like report-like that you just show and there's no editing, and then you can have pages that are editable, and then they are, you don't need, both for us as a company, but also for all our customers, that they can be sure that the pages will look the same and can seamlessly transition, because that would open up a whole new ability to put a proxy server in front of this, or a cache, basically. Well, that's what I'm saying, like Cloudflare. And then you can have, and Google can index all your pages that you have designed and built and doing in your application, and they will be very, very quick to fetch. And then the customer can seamlessly transition into an edit mode, and that edit mode will then be fully dynamic and with all the features of that type of client. And then we have put together two very powerful things, because this is, it might sound so easy. It's just yeah, it's static, and then it's not static, but it's actually not easy at all to make that happen without you having to figure out rendering that can really, so that can switch like that. So it's not possible for example in Angular. You can't have, so we have had the problem with maintaining double templating systems.
Yeah. So it's maybe the main driver for us wanting to make the switch is not that Angular is bad in any way, but that Blazor is more versatile and solves more use cases for us. So once we reach feature completeness versus the Angular, then we will promote the Blazor strategy to because then we can focus to maintain a simpler code base, which is cheaper to develop. So that's a great promise. Yeah, so there's a ton of things. Maybe I should have prepared to show you the rendered component. I can't remember where I put it. I do 1,000 things and then sort of forget where I have them. When it restart.
I've been the one asking questions and asking things here. There's 10 minutes left. Do we have any questions about this Blazor strategy going forward? Not really, no. What we want to do also is that, because it is a bit of a shame that our main page, MDriven.net, is not rendered by our turnkey server. It is just a .NET Core site. And of course it shouldn't be. It should be our servers rendering that Blazor fast or cache fast. So that's one of the things we want to shift in the future, because as always, when you don't have dynamic data and an administrative UI in the back end of your site, you don't update it as much as you should. So we want a modeled first page that looks and is as fast as any other like static page, but it is fully dynamically driven by data in a database.
Yeah. So and of course, once we have the ability to render static pages and cache them and have them served pre-rendered, then the MDriven framework would be also a very good framework to build a content management system within. If you pair it with an editor, and then you would do a model over the different things and parts that you want to show on or to maintain in the CMS. That would be a great win. And of course, when we have that, we should do all of our stuff in MDriven to dog food on that.
Because
then
if you look
only have the wiki left.
Yeah. If you look at what we have done, what you have done, Hans, when it comes to dynamic editing with the built-in editor that you can just drag things along in the UI, you could imagine that somewhere in the future, I don't know when, that these things will meet, and it will be even easier to live edit your website that is like statically rendered, right? So you can really see how these things could come together to a very powerful rendering engine that doesn't have any built-in limitations in how you want to present it. Because let's say we had a customer that are working with huge amounts of documents that are created over time. And then the question was, how do we keep 100,000 documents? We want basically to render them and save them rendered. And then this could do that. So it can scale from this fully flexible interactive client to a huge base of rendered documents that are stored. But then, of course, you always say, like, yeah, I want to render and store it forever. Well, until someone wants the styling to change, then you want to re-render them. So that's what we're promising here, basically, is that you can have a rendering engine that can make style changes and those things, yes, but keep the data that you actually are presenting, the same over time.
Yeah. And as you alluded to, the designer, once we are in .NET 8 with that and able to use these newly created Blazor controls in the designer, that will be a great win for the VisiVig feeling of building UI, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking this also, if we go even further to what you have talked about for many years, Hans, is to make the whole designer possible to render in a web browser.
Yeah.
And that might even be possible then, but as always, you need something to stand on top of. So first we need Blazor, interactive pages and all those things, and then with that knowledge and those capabilities, one could imagine a whole designer rendered by using C# in the browser.
Yeah, it's quite a bit away, but
yeah, I know.
can see that it isn't. Yeah. So very good. And everything that I've shown here today is available in the latest download. So it's I urge everyone to try to see what happens and to get going. And shouldn't be too many hiccups, but of course, still early days and work is progressing. So what I can say that initially it didn't look that good because the rendering was maybe 5 to 10 times slower than in Angular. But once I introduced the checksum to reduce the excessive re-rendering, it picked up speed and is on par with the Angular when it comes to everything. But it seems that large tables are still a tiny bit faster in Angular, and I'm not sure where that comes from. But we'll see. of course, that's not the other part why we want to prepare and change is that AngularJS isn't maintained actively by anyone any longer. So it won't get better from this point. It will be the same. So.
And probably slowly rot a bit.
Yeah, so as everything does, no one knows where it comes from, but it seems to be a generic thing in software. Leave it alone and it will fail.
The rest of the world moves on and changes, and
Yeah.
it doesn't keep up.
Yeah. Things around it change. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for showing up, and we'll post the video of this. And if you have questions later on, please get back to me with those, so we'll do our best to answer.
And you can always reach us at support@mdriven.net if you have questions. That's the safest way to get in touch. Yes, and I hope everyone here at least will get the newsletter also. So, yeah, see you in a month, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nope.